opposed to the interim officers who are serving now, which will take place in April, you will need to have executed the membership agreement by February 14th. It's available online at the IDESG website, which is idecosystem.org. Tomorrow at lunch, we will be having birds of a feather sessions. However, we do not have any provisions for having box lunches brought in, so we need to coordinate actually getting lunch with having birds of the feathers sessions. So there is a local outfit that will allow you to pre-order lunches. And so there are going to be sticky notes available to sign up for what lunch you would like to order. Kay, do you know where the sticky notes are going to go?
Yeah, on that wall.
On this wall.
The lunch, you have to order that on your own.
Oh, you have to order it on your own.
Right.
Oh, right. Sticky notes will be to sign up for the Birds of the Feather session. There's an online page, idecosystem.org/page/lunch-break-options, and you can order your lunches there. I'll spell it slowly for people later if they come up and see me in person. Also, you can talk to the secretariat at the desk back here. Finally, two more announcements. First, I'd like to thank, as usual, our sponsors. There are restrictions on what IDESG can provide to members based on the terms of the contract with the Secretariat. So we rely on sponsors to provide coffee breaks. And Dayon is kindly sponsoring a coffee break this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon. And Verizon will be sponsoring tomorrow morning's coffee break. So let's give a hand to our sponsors. Because as we all know, it's impossible to sustain human life in the technical community without coffee. Finally, I'd like to ask everybody to be aware that the plenary is being live streamed to the internet. And so you should be aware that your comments and your image via the camera right back there may be shared online, and you need to act accordingly. Also, of course, we will be doing our level best to make sure that the people who are participating with us online are able to be a first-class part of the conversation, and the Secretariat will be assisting me with that task. So those are the announcements. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Jeremy Grant, the head of the NSTIC National Program Office, to come up and give us a few words, and then I'll come back and abuse your patience some more.
Thanks, Bob. And great to see everybody. I thought the suit was appropriate for this morning's bidders conference, but I wanted to send a slightly more subtle message as we embark on things this afternoon. It's great to see so many of you here and also online. By the way, we did get the message for those who are online that when the podium mic was like this, people could hear. So hopefully this helps a little bit more. I think we've got close to 175, 180 people in the room, and I think about 200 online. So we're really appreciative of the turnout and your participation in this, the third meeting of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group Plenary. I'm also thrilled we were able to arrange for the WHO to be in town during this meeting. It was a little hard to do given some of the restrictions on what federal grant dollars can be spent on. But Roger and Pete were really excited when we told them we were coming to Phoenix, having spent most of their lives asking truly NSTIC-related questions such as, who are you, who. They really understand better than most rock stars what it is that we're up against. It is truly a sign from up above that the band with the most identity ecosystem-centric name in the universe is playing during our event. And while there is no official excursion to the show tomorrow night, I am planning to go, as I know are many of you. It seemed to be a very fitting outing, paid for, of course, not with NSTIC program federal grant dollars, but out of my own pocket. And I'm certain it will provide the inspiration for a very productive conclusion to our meeting on Thursday. Real quick, before we get started, there's just three things I wanted to offer as we get ready to kick off this third plenary meeting of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. First, I'm really personally excited, as I know are many of you, that this meeting will focus very little on process and procedure and governance issues, and very much on looking to find consensus on a high-level work plan for this body to execute over the months to come It also is the first meeting where we actually have our new IPR policy in place. I know for many companies and individuals this was made things very difficult to participate in the past, and I'm excited that this will provide a foundation for the group to start to really engage in more meaningful dialogue going forward. As we look at the high-level work plan, I think an item that's sometimes lost in the steering group conversation is why it is that the White House thought it was important to establish the steering group in the first place. NSIC was quite explicit as to the steering group's purpose. It's to craft an identity ecosystem framework of standards and policies along with an accreditation process to support it. Let me repeat that again, a framework of standards and policies supported by an accreditation system. And as you'll see this afternoon, we'll be focusing quite a bit these next 3 days exactly on that topic. And I know that working together, we're going to come out of here on Thursday with a great deal done to actually move forward. As we embark on this effort, let me just touch briefly on the subtle message that I've chosen to wear on my chest today. Everything we're talking about with the identity ecosystem is great. NSTIC is a fantastic concept. But if relying parties don't sign up to participate in the identity ecosystem, and if we don't somehow come up with an easy path for them to participate, this effort will probably fail. There's not enough relying parties here today in the room. I know there are certainly some, and I'm really appreciative for their effort. That's something that needs to change, and it's something we all need to work together to help change over the months to come. And it will take a little bit of time. So as we are starting to do the work today, looking at building a framework for the identity ecosystem, I'd like to ask all of you to just keep in the back of your minds some of the parties who aren't here but that are going to need to be part of the conversation. Be thinking about what will we need to do to actually entice them to participate. What is the value proposition that the identity ecosystem can offer them? If we can make some progress there, I think we'll be much closer to success. And since I, as the government, am advocating for thinking about big companies as part of the RPs, my friend Bob, who works for a big bank, will also remind you of the importance of the individual later. We've arranged that. Second, I just want to talk real quick on the NSIC pilots. Obviously, on the new solicitation we just launched for the second round, we just had a bidders conference a couple hours ago in this room. Just a reminder again, that was literally the only time we can actually talk about the FFO that's out, the federal funding opportunity. So please don't be asking any of the NIST staff that are out here questions about whether this idea would be great for a proposal or who you should team with or whatnot. We can't answer them. All of the staff have been through extensive training on this Fight Club style, so the first, second, third, and fourth rule of NIST attendance at this event is never talk about the pilot's federal funding opportunity. I did want to address, for the 5 NSIC pilots that were awarded last year, there's been a lot of interest from steering group members in hearing more about them, and that'll actually be a big focus of the next plenary in May, I hope. But in the interim, one thing our office is planning to do is start to pose some questions to the steering group that are emerging from some of the pilot awardees as they move forward. It turns out a lot of them have areas where they're seeking some guidance as they look to implement their solutions, and later this month we'll start to pose some of, I guess, what are the common questions, common themes that are emerging from the different pilots to the steering group to get input. Finally, just as Bob mentioned, please keep in mind the membership agreements for the steering group are due on Valentine's Day. They've been coming in at a good clip, but there's still a lot of individuals and organizations who have yet to sign. After several months of this really being a bit of a free-form organization, we now have a structure of rules in place for the steering group, including an IPR policy that I mentioned earlier. That provides a real good foundation for us to do good collaborative work together, and so it's important to get those agreements signed from your organizations as quickly as possible so that we can actually move forward. So with that, let's get on with the show. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. So I learned from the online chat that I have to talk into both microphones to be audible on the telephone and on the live stream. So let's see, do I have a clicker? Yes, I do. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to give sort of a little bit of a historical retrospective of the overall evolution of the identity ecosystem, just for the benefit of anybody who hasn't been here with us. And then I'm going to talk about what we're going to do, especially today, but over the next 3 days. The simple answer is we're going to start doing the actual work. We've spent 2 meetings getting organized, getting our governance documents in place. And I know that some of you have been chomping at the bit to start doing work. And so if you're wondering why we haven't had presentations like this before, the answer is because we didn't have an intellectual property policy. And I will remind you that now that we have that policy in place, In the plenary, we are bound by that policy, including guests. And what the policy basically says is that if you submit a written document or an idea, you grant us the IDESG copyright license to use the idea. And so the slides that you see here are submitted under those terms. So what are we going to be doing today specifically? So today, our fundamental objective is to produce 2 deliverables as a body. And by the way, when I say deliverables, I don't mean something that we are going to vote on and adopt. I mean works in progress that we are going to refine in the future as we go forward doing our work. So the first deliverable is going to be a consensus description and picture of the components of the end-state identity ecosystem framework. So Jeremy said earlier that it's our task to provide a set of standards and policies and accreditation criteria, and that's fine at a high level, but we have to be specific eventually because we will have to produce specific recommendations. And so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be breaking up into a set of table groups, and you won't have assigned seats this time, unlike in Washington. And we're going to ask each group to consider what needs to be on the master list of work items, which are going to eventually be assigned to committees, which are going to be tracked by the Management Council as deliverables of the organization, and which are eventually going to be produced as formal work items of the IDESG. And the second deliverable is the definition of 2 work streams, each of which can be finished quickly. So the idea here, and by the way, this is aspirational. We won't necessarily wrap up 2 work streams in exactly 9 months and issue press releases, but we should want to do that. And the reason that we should want to do that is because in about 18 months, the NIST grant support will run out, and we will be expected to transition to self-supporting organization status. And that means that there is going to have to be a reason for people to come and participate in the work. And the best reason for people to come and participate in the work is because it is producing artifacts of value to the citizens and to businesses and relying parties and identity providers. So the challenge that I'm going to put out today is in the second deliverable is think about the first 2 press releases you want to see come out of the IDESG saying, we've done something that's pretty cool and we think you should try it out. So I'd like us to think about, and by the way, press releases about, for example, standards or press releases about accreditation policies are less exciting than Apple keynotes. What I would like to see is I would like to see us produce something which is of interest to citizens and which is of interest to businesses, and which somebody in the White House might be willing to step up and say, hey, NSTIC has started to do what we asked it to do and has started to produce value to the country. So I'll get into a little bit more detail about this later. But first, a tiny bit of history here. So, in the beginning, there were identity providers, and the identity providers typically were also relying parties, right? So you would go to a company's website and you would enroll in the website, and then you would use the identity that you had at that website to log in. And then you'd go to another website and you'd do the same thing. And you'd go to another website and you'd do the same thing. And you'd go to another website and you'd do the same thing, and you'd get out an Excel spreadsheet and write all your passwords down in it. So that was obviously bad. And so the first thing that we did to try to fix that problem was we invented federation protocols, which allow identity providers and relying parties to talk to one another. And that was more convenient for the users, but it's not super convenient for the identity providers and relying parties because they had an n-squared scaling problem. So after we worked on that for a while and federation began to become popular, we invented federation hubs and trust framework providers. And these were basically frameworks within which a collection of identity providers and relying parties could band together and build an ecosystem which allowed a user to have one identity and which allowed identity providers and relying parties to have sort of a reasonable scale problem and enroll in the system. Now, of course, and this is sort of where we're at today, and we have done this successfully enough that there are 5 or 6 different federation hubs and trust framework providers out there. So, of course, we've created another version of the same problem in the usual turtles all the way down sense. And now, the question is, okay, so I'm fine with my in-common ID, as a faculty member of a university, but if I'm also a biopharma researcher, I have to join Safe Biopharma as well. So I still have this multiplicity of identities. So, of course, we don't want to do the usual, thing and create an n-squared scale problem in the trust framework universe. And that really is the reason that we are here. We're here to build an ecosystem that makes the system scale sensibly for all parties involved. And that includes trust framework providers, it includes relying parties, it includes identity providers, and it includes users. And obviously, this is going to have to accommodate a fair range of diversity, because not all of the trust framework providers and not all the identity providers are going to have the same terms. They'll have different contracts, they'll have different regulatory environments. And so the structure that we build has to live within the constraints of government policy, but it also has to provide a degree of flexibility to both users and relying parties on the top, and to the identity providers and trust framework providers in the middle. And very importantly, the structure that we build has to either create or accommodate commercial incentives which allow the organizations in this picture to have an ongoing life as sustainable businesses. So what does this look like in the specific case that we're talking about? So this next slide is a little bit of a minefield. As the chair of the organization, I'm not supposed to be making proposals. I'm not supposed to be giving you the idea. I'm supposed to be asking the questions, and you're supposed to be giving the answers. So I sort of thought about, just putting, in the beginning, it was all formless and void up in the slide. But I figured that would be a little bit too unspecific. I know that there are people in the organization who have developed pictures and text descriptions of what needs to be in here. So I'm just going to give you a very, very coarse-grained view of what I'm looking for to come out of deliverable 1 in the table discussions that you're going to have. So, and by the way, I won't admit my sources here, because some of the sources that I drew upon as inspirations will be proposed as specific answers to this question. And I want more than one answer to come forward, and I want people to have the discussion about the merits of the various different ways of representing the structure. So does this thing have a laser on it? Ooh, look at that, I have a laser. So the idea, of course, is that there are multiple layers of the structure, as on the previous slide, and down at the bottom layer, there is the government, and the government defines the laws and regulations within which our commercial and policy activities have to take place. And then up above the government layer, commissioned by the government, is us, the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. And we define essentially a body of private law, a set of standards and policies and accreditation frameworks that people who want to play in the identity ecosystem voluntarily agree to in order to get certain kinds of benefits, including usability, privacy, security, and so forth. Within that structure, there will be a number of trust framework providers, and these are essentially either sector organizations or community organizations that develop their own policies and profiles and their own contractual arrangements. And the idea here is maybe in one environment there is a need for highly anonymous transactions, and in another environment there is a need for highly identified transactions, and those environments need to have separate rules, so they have separate trust framework providers. And then inside each of the trust framework provider organizations, there are individual identity providers. These are businesses or other organizations, not-for-profits, which create identities and maintain them on behalf of individuals. And again, they have their own practices and terms and contracts and what have you. And then up at the top, there are relying parties and individual end users. Now, one of the things that ought to be the case here is that users' view of the system should be relatively homogeneous, right? So in the real world, I don't have to get a new name every time I walk into a new grocery store, right? And online, if we're successful, the ecosystem that we build will provide me with a similar degree of portability of my identity within the constraints of the requirements of the transaction that I'm engaging in. So task one for today is to turn that cartoon that I just showed you into a detailed picture of what we're building. And I say picture advisedly. I think we need to have two things, right? We need to have a text description, which is at a level of detail that we can turn it into detailed work items. But we also need to have something that we can put up on the wall that we recognize as the picture of what we're doing. When I was a long time ago chairing the SAML standardization effort, there was this moment where Hal Lockhart stood up and drew a picture on the board, and all of a sudden everybody in the room discovered that we were talking about the same thing, right? And so in order for us to have a functional conversation with each other about what's in scope and what's out of scope and what goes in what place, I think it's important to have a picture that we can all agree on. And I would encourage you to not think of what I just showed as the final product. I want you guys to come up with a picture that feels right to you, and we'll argue about which one of your pictures is right. So that's task one for today. So just a little bit of background and color on this. And Brett, by the way, if I'm running way long, could you give me the high sign and the hook, and I'll speed up. So I want to talk a little bit on background about the constraints on this activity. So what problems are in scope? Well, identity is a complicated problem, right? It raises issues of naming, right? What can I call myself? What do other people see? What name do I use when I enroll? Enrollment, how are new accounts created, and how often do I have to do this, right? I don't want to have to enroll lots of times. One of the benefits of the ecosystem should be I should enroll a few times and use my identity lots of places. Schema, what goes into an identity? What attributes can be provided? What attributes have to be protected? Vetting, what procedures assure the identity of applicants for accounts? So in my business, banking, we have to ask people specific questions under Know Your Customer laws to ensure that we know that we're dealing with a legitimate customer. Introduction. I think introduction problems are really an important source of friction in today's identity ecosystem. How do I connect my account to a new relying party? How does a relying party connect its service to a new identity provider or to a new trust framework? Usually these activities involve a lot of work, and that creates disincentives to use the identity ecosystem, and it's something that we should be talking about. Authentication, of course, this is sort of the standard thing that we talk about in this area. Federation, how do I authenticate one place and have that authentication conveyed to another place? And then transactions, we were having a conversation earlier today about what identity attributes and what kinds of names are required for what types of transactions. So we're probably going to need at a certain point to have a discussion of what transaction types exist and what their characteristics are. Privacy, of course, is one of our formal obligations under the NSTIC principles. User experience is another of our formal obligations. So there are identity systems which are frighteningly hard to use and some which are only agonizingly hard to use, and we should be able to do better than both. And then finally, security, right? And this doesn't just mean level of authentication assurance or identity assurance, it also means security for the individual against things like identity theft and privacy invasions and what have you. So, of course, we always have to keep in mind the principles which we are required to observe by our charter, and that is that the solutions that we build have to be voluntary, privacy-enhancing, secure, resilient, cost-effective, easy to use, and interoperable. So now I'm going to go through just a little cautionary tale. So there's been a fair amount of dialogue on the email lists about, well, you know, there's a lot of this that we already know how to do. We have solutions to some of these problems. And then on the other side of the argument, there has been the, well, actually, you know, that system doesn't work for me for a variety of reasons. So I want to give just a little color of that discussion for you to take into the afternoon sessions. So, you know, if you have a single relying party and it's got a population of people and it's got registration procedures, the relying party, you know, once it sets up business and enrolls people, probably thinks that the system is working. And if that relying party then relies on an identity provider, and there's other relying parties in that ecosystem, the identity provider and the RP can get into a position where they're happy. And if a trust framework provider springs up in a community and allows a bunch of different identity providers to operate in the same ecosystem, everybody can be happy in that scenario too, and in a lot of cases everybody is happy in that scenario today. People are pretty happy with, for example, InCommon or some of these other systems. And if we do the same thing and we build another layer on top and we allow everybody to plug into it, it's possible for us to think, oh, we've solved the problem. But there are problems that we might not have solved in a scenario like this. So the first of them is, if what we do is just find a way to glue the silos together so that it's easy to connect another silo into the framework, that solves a problem maybe for us, and it may solve a problem for trust framework providers or even identity providers, but relying parties and users are still going to have a lot of complexity associated with moving across the silos. So we have to be careful to think about these introduction problems and these mobility problems and these portability problems and make sure that we don't just provide a standard set of rules for building silos. Another thing that we have to be careful about is obviously, you know, that it can at some level work for all of the entities in the ecosystem except maybe the end user and the relying party, but also work for criminals, right? So we don't want to have a situation where we build a system that facilitates the collection and exchange of large amounts of identity information and then doesn't do anything useful to protect it. So obviously, you know, a solution to this is that you want to build an ecosystem that also works for the police, and you want to build a system that works securely for the advertisers, but there's also a hazard in that, right? So, and the hazard there is that if you build something that looks like a system of universal surveillance, or if you build something that looks like a system which exists in order to sell your data to advertisers without considering your wishes and your consent, then that still doesn't work for the end users. So the second sort of theme that I want to leave here is we have to think about trade-offs, right? And there is not going to be a perfect solution to this problem. There are going to be multiple institutional interests, and our task is to try to build something with enough flexibility that every individual person and relying party can find a balance of services that they find meets their needs. So, so here's the takeaway from this little movie. There are a bunch of things that are in fact working today in existing provider silos and in existing federations, and we need to learn those lessons. There are also some things that seem to be working today, but some of them only work from the point of view of some parties. So it's easy if you're, you know, for example, a social networking outfit, to say, my identity system is working, I have lots and lots of users, I have lots of traffic. And not only that, but I have lots